As President Livingston said earlier, the focus of the show today is on policing, criminal justice, and related topics. And we have two guests. So as is our custom, we'll bring one on at a time, and then we'll all stay together and talk and field questions from the audience as well. So always a reminder that you can email us at askus@lewisu.edu if you have questions during the course of the show. So our first guest is our Lewis University Police Chief, Mike Zegadlo. Before working in law enforcement, Mike was the director of campus life here at Lewis, and then later became an assistant dean of students at North Central College. And then after working as a municipal police officer in Naperville, Mike returned to Lewis in 2011 to help with the foundation of the Lewis University Police Department, which will celebrate its 10th anniversary on April 4th. So we're very happy to welcome Chief Zegadlo. Welcome. It's your second time on the show, so you're becoming a regular.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for joining us, Mike.
So I just mentioned the foundation of the department. So people may be asking, what was it like before, and what is unique about having a police department on a university campus?
Sure. So prior to 2011, there was simply a security department in place, and in Illinois, there's a statute called the Illinois Private College Campus Police Act, which allows for private colleges and universities, by way of a resolution from their board of trustees, to commission police departments. So in November of 2011, our board of trustees passed one of those resolutions, and LUPD came into existence in early 2011. And, the importance of having a police department as opposed to a security department or some sort of contract public safety infrastructure is that it permits us to have a really robust, well-trained, competent, certified, experienced public safety infrastructure in place that really allows us to reach out into the community, do a lot more proactive community education, crime prevention programming. We have a much more wide array of response capabilities as opposed to a security department. We have the ability to interface with other agencies, outside agencies, like our great collaborators, the Romeoville Police. I can't say enough about Chief Kroll and his team. We have interagency agreements with the Illinois State Police and Will County Emergency Management. We have the ability to get law enforcement sensitive intelligence, both through federal partners, the FBI and the Illinois State Police. We have access to criminal justice information. We can run criminal history checks as part of our investigations and that kind of thing. So it really just allows for a much bigger toolbox in terms of providing public safety service to the community in having a police department.
That's great. So, you mentioned this. Could you just talk, Mike, a little bit about maybe one or two ways in which what you just mentioned, because I knew this was happening. You said, you get kind of updates or information from other agencies. So I know, for instance, in the last 12 months, there have been events in this country that have led, whether it's the FBI or, state police, to up the concern over what could happen. How does that work? Can you talk a little bit about, do you get on a Zoom call? Do you get on a phone call? Is it with the state police? Is it with the federal, policing agencies?
Sure. Yeah. If I use the unrest at the Capitol as an example of that, in the days leading up to that and the several weeks after, there was a lot of intelligence to be analyzed and to be shared. So that comes by way of partnerships. We have an FBI liaison officer. We have a connection to STIC, which is our Illinois Counterterrorism Intelligence Center, and we get it's everything from an email bulletin to we do Zoom calls and WebEx calls over secured lines where the director of the Illinois State Police will facilitate a conversation for all the police leaders in the state of Illinois, and he'll bring them in and he'll present the latest intelligence and then the recommendations that go along with that. So it allows us to kind of monitor the pulse of what's going on, especially when we have these developing events. And, similarly in terms of the pandemic, we were doing the same thing with the Will County Health Department and Will County Emergency Management Agency, because these things are fluid and dynamic and kind of develop so quickly. Not staying on top of the intelligence can be really challenging. So we're lucky enough to be tied into all those channels and be able to participate in real time with those discussions and be tied in with our state and local partners.
Interesting how our fact that we have a police department allows us to have access to that information, and it is a mark of similarity we have to local municipalities. And in some ways, our universities, as we know from the news, are particularly sensitive to some of the topics that come that Mike's talking about. Mike, I wonder if you could maybe talk about the other end of that coin, from your experience, from your knowledge of the work, but also from your experience in Naperville. What are some of the differences between a campus police force and a municipal police force?
It's really two different worlds of policing, and that's the way it should be. In municipal policing, it's more transactional. And when I talk with new employees about kind of what our ethos, what our philosophy is in approach to public safety here, we focus on being participants in this developmental journey of students. So when we run into a student who's in crisis, they're violating a university policy or a state statute or a local ordinance, in municipal policing, the mission at that point is to develop probable cause to make an arrest to prosecute a crime. In campus policing, when we run into a student in crisis, the mission is to try to do a diagnosis of what's caused this student to be out of line with our behavioral expectations of the community. And what type of intervention can we engineer right now in real time to help get that student back on a track of academic and personal success? So the whole orientation is different. Now, there's a caveat that goes over all of that. Of course, if there's a threat to public safety involved in the behavior, then it's much more, the intervention is less about student development, more about mitigating a public safety threat. But the vast majority of our interactions with community members don't involve threats to public safety. So we work with our personnel to try to train them about access to resources and connections with student conduct and our student services partners and the counseling center and all of the resources, academic support, financial aid, all of the resources that could help a student who's kind of deviated off track to get them back on track. So it's really, I like to think of it as the approach being intervention based as opposed to enforcement based.
So you've written about that, right, Mike? Could you talk a little bit about that kind of theoretical difference or practical difference, or I guess it's both?
Yeah, the entire police industry is really struggling with the concept of reform lately. And, there are a lot of really good police leaders. There are a lot of good organizations like the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police that are pro-reform, and they want to push policing into the 21st century and modernize and to fix the things that are broken. And the article to which you're referring is one I wrote for the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, where I offered private small college campus police departments as an example for municipal police to look at in terms of how we do things a little bit differently, how we approach our relationships with our community differently, and our orientation towards community policing being based on a formula of relationship building that kind of starts as early as orientation, or even when students come to visit for a campus visit day. We want our community members to be interacting with police outside of enforcement experiences from the very beginning, so that we can begin to build trust and begin to build a relationship. And that's what really fosters a community policing environment, having a trusting relationship with your department. And you can't do that if the only time you interact with people is when you're pulling them over on a traffic stop or writing them a parking ticket. There's got to be community education. There's got to be outreach. There's got to be relationship building as part of the background of that relationship. And I kind of challenged municipal departments to be open to that. And part of that article involved the concept of wearing more hats. We have to be open to doing things that aren't necessarily part of our defined mission or job description as law enforcement. During the pandemic, LUPD has rebooted hundreds of computers on campus. That's not really a law enforcement function, but when we're the only people here and folks are remoting in from home and their computer shuts down, we send a cop to reboot their computer. So, and kind of having an openness to stepping outside your position description and being able to adapt and help your community where it's needed.
That's great, Mike. Thank you so much for that summary. Chief Zegadlo, we'd love to have you come back on with us. Welcome back. We won't ask you about your college degree, which we know you have from Lewis, but we don't have time for that. I guess we don't have a ton of time left in the hour, so I just want to maybe get to the most question that we hear the most about, which is this question of defunding the police that's been, or that catchphrase that we've all heard a lot this year. I wonder if each of you could just kind of reflect a little bit about what that really means and how the ideas that each of you have talked about kind of relates to the ongoing national conversation that we're having right now. And maybe Chief Zegadlo, you can go first since you've been away from us a bit.
Sure. And talking to the two people responsible for approving my budget, I'll be very cautious in choosing my words about defunding the police department. I think that the defund the police movement, like many police reform movements, has its genesis in good intentions, but because of the language that's chosen or the way that it kind of organically grows, it turns into something that becomes negative. So at the crux of the defund the police concept is that funding should be taken from law enforcement agencies and put into community programs that will help support local communities in ways that would reduce crime. I believe strongly in the second half of the equation. So I think we need to do better in the areas of mental health. I think we need to do better in the areas of homelessness and drug addiction and taking care of many of the sources of crime on the street. I don't agree that funding necessarily ought to come from a police department in a particular municipality. Most police departments are struggling to manage the resources they have to accomplish their goals. So it sounds like I'm preaching we just need more money, but that is kind of the answer. We do need to support the destination that the defund the police funding is headed toward, but I don't think it should come from necessarily the law enforcement agencies that are out there every day struggling to stay ahead of the crime in their communities. We're fortunate here at Lewis where we don't have a lot of crime on campus, so much of the work and the resources that are expended through our department go into proactive community building programming, as opposed to buying MRAVs and armored cars and stuff.
Thank you. Vesna?
Yeah, so I mean, I absolutely agree. The defund the police was specifically meant to talk about redistributing funds towards these, what we would call essential services, social services, that are also underfunded, like housing, education, employment, mental health. But the problem is some people are calling for an abolishment or dismantling of the police, and that also becomes a problem if you kind of think about the crime and the way it is. I live in the city of Chicago, and I'll just share this really quickly. Last week, I was grading discussion boards in my makeshift office at home, and I hear, I'm on a main artery, so I hear cars zooming by all the time. I hear ambulances, police cars, and I just hear two cars zoom by, and then I hear screeching tires, and then I hear 4 or 5 gunshots. And obviously I got away from the windows, but the first thing I did was call 911 because I'm not equipped as a citizen to go out there and take care of that type of a problem. I listen to the police scanners a lot because I do hear the sirens all the time. And unfortunately, like in the last 2 weeks, I just hear all these sirens. And a lot of the calls that the police get in my area, in my district in Chicago, are mental health related. And so they'll say, yesterday there was a call, a guy called on his roommate because he said the roommate was drinking for a week's time. He was urinating on himself, and then he was just causing all kinds of problem and very disgruntled, and he couldn't do anything about him. So they called the police. And so these are challenging things that even as a PhD, I'm not a PhD in psychology, so I wouldn't know necessarily how to deal with this type of an issue. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to, 21st century policing.
Just ask for the two of you, just to extend it feels like, trying to pull this together, because we are going to run out of time and we probably want to ask other questions, but it feels to me like, what you said earlier, Mike, and then what you kind of rephrased in terms of the defunding, in terms of your article and your kind of call for metropolitan policing to have more of this holistic approach. And then, Vesna, what you're talking about in terms of these broader social services that, again, you or many police officers, they don't have a PhD in psychology, but they can, your reference to this article you mentioned, that police officers should have a degree, because by having a degree, they at least have some of those skills and they can approach it. And it feels like both of you are, in some sense, saying the same thing. And then it wraps around to the degree programs we actually have here. And of course, now I'm selling what we sell, which is education. But it feels like both of you are saying, the more holistically educated the police force is, the safer the society is. So I don't know if either one of you want to comment on that, but it just seems like that's the crux of everything you've said, and that our students are getting that kind of an education. It's a critical thinking, broad education that prepares them to keep the public safe in a very complicated and sometimes very dangerous world.
Yeah, and absolutely. Like the research had said was, they focused on several different things, but to get a degree, they say that they're 40% less likely to use force, and they're 30% less likely to fire weapons in the line of duty. And this is research that was done on, a study of officer-involved shooting. So, the degree can enhance some of these skills, critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, where, you don't necessarily need to resort to something like we saw in Minnesota, where, the officer was clearly in the wrong by putting his knee in the neck of somebody who counterfeit a $20 bill. This is completely, just completely terrible to see. They should not be doing that. And so, having the degree can help them kind of think these problems through. And I'll let the chief talk so we have some time for questions and answers.
Yeah, modern policing in the 21st century it's not a physical game, it's a mental acuity challenge. It's a thinking person's game. It's about problem solving, it's about communication, it's about de-escalation. And the most successful police officers I've encountered in my career are the ones that are cognitively, mentally, and emotionally prepared for those challenges. And Vesna is absolutely right. If you've got a stupid police officer who doesn't know how to manage his emotions and problem solve, he or she's going to be unsuccessful on the street and is likely to end up hurting someone. So if you have an intelligent person who's a good problem solver and can control language and manage their kind of emotional IQ, that's going to result in a safe community and a successful police officer.
So unfortunately, we have to wrap this up. We could probably go on for another hour, which is why we have degrees in this, so you can spend 4 years, studying and talking about this stuff. I just want to say how grateful I am for both of you joining us for the show today. Thank you, Dr. Sindt, for being on here. We're really grateful for what you do for our community, Chief Zegadlo. And Dr. Markovic, we're so grateful for your leadership in what is an incredibly important field of study for our society, and very important at Lewis University, one of our largest departments. So thank you both for joining us.